Hello and welcome to another video. In this one, I'll be analyzing the whole Donetsk region front line, and this will be done similar to my Zaporizhia analysis, and it'll be the second episode in this series. So starting out, we'll be looking at the whole front line with the supply lines, and then we'll be looking closer on to the Donetsk front. The reason I'm starting out like this is because we have to look at the concentration of forces, and I'll be starting out with that since there is a grand scale to look at in this specific front line. So starting out, we know that Russia has mobilized up to 300,000 or more soldiers since the start of October. This means that Russia has 300,000 troops that they can place somewhere on this whole front line. And there's no clear evidence as to where they are focusing these forces. There is, of course, a substantial amount that has been sent to the Donbas region. This is to help and block any gaps that there were before, and they have now been filled. However, there's still a very significant amount where the allocation of them is not clear. So they could be placed anywhere on this whole front line to Belarus, or to Kursk or Bryansk or to Belgorod. This means that Ukraine has to put troops on this whole front line so that they're ready to face them wherever they will come from. Of course, the West has satellite imagery so they can check all of these areas. However, currently there's an ongoing exercise happening in Belarus in these 6 locations, which means that these 6 locations could be the concentration of forces of the Russian mobilized forces, as there's been a lot of trains going in and out. However, it could also just be a diversion. At the same time, there's also concentration of forces around Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod. So on this whole front, there's Russian troops. However, it is not clear whether this is the recently conscripted crew troops or the recently mobilized troops. One of them is filled with conscripts, the other is filled with mobilized troops, and it's not clear which is which. They both have tanks, they both have artillery, they both have all of the equipment that they need, so it's not clear which is which. It could come from either side with a large force. So Ukraine has to prepare for either of them to be true, so they have to fill out this whole front line. Which means, in a scenario where Russia focuses a lot of its forces in the Donbas region, Ukraine cannot put all of their forces to the south, as that leaves the north vulnerable. They cannot just send all their troops to the south. That would leave the north completely vulnerable. Both Lviv and Kiev would be vulnerable, as well as Sumy and Poltava, which are very significant supply lines for the south. So essentially what I'm saying is that as for the relocation of forces and concentration of forces, despite Ukraine having a very significant advantage with more than 3 supply lines directly to the front line, they cannot concentrate their forces in the south as much as Russia can, because Russia has the ability to attack from all sides, and Ukraine does not know where they will attack from. And Ukraine cannot take the initiative by attacking Belarus, for example, because that would leave the rest of Ukraine vulnerable. So in this scenario, Russia has the initiative in where to attack and how many troops to concentrate in that attack. Moving on to the second part. We have to look at the weather. So looking at the weather, we see that starting tomorrow and onwards a whole week, it will constantly be in the positives. There will be a lot of rain. So although the ground is currently hard and frozen, it will soon dry up, and then there will be a lot of rain, which will make the whole ground muddy, and it will take a while before we return to the negative degrees and the ground freezes again. This means for at least the coming week, there will not be any large-scale military campaigns in the Donetsk region, as the weather generally does not allow it. There may be some for today and tomorrow, and maybe even the day after, but after that it will be so muddy that no forces will be able to advance in these regions. This means that what we're seeing right now is a build-up and a clearance to wear down the Ukrainian defenses before the weather turns bad. Then they prepare for the next bunch of attack, and then they will have a whole 2 months period in which they can focus the forces here in the south and take the Donetsk region, as the weather will allow it. Finally, as for logistics, we see that both sides are very well equipped on this front line, and neither side can prevent the other side from being supplied, as the supply lines goes straight from Russia to the Donetsk region through Luhansk and the southeast, as well as Rostov, and even from Mariupol by ship, and all the way from Crimea as well if necessary. So Russia has the ability to concentrate a lot of supplies and forces here in the south, but so does Ukraine, as if we look from the Ukrainian perspective, they have both supplies from Kharkiv as well as Dnipro going straight to the front line. This allows them to have a very large concentration of forces that is well supplied in the Donetsk region. This means that we'll most likely see the largest battle happening in the Donetsk region, as both sides have a very well supplied and very large force concentrated here in the south. Now, knowing that, we have to look in detail at the terrain so that we're able to see what plans either side will have and how they will execute them. So first off, starting with the Russian perspective, they're focusing heavily on Bakhmut. So starting out, we'll ask why Bakhmut, and that is very simple. It is because it is the front line city between the triple line of Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, and Konstantinivka. And the only thing between this line and the front line is Siversk and Bakhmut. So right now we're seeing the Russians focusing their attacks around Siversk and Bakhmut. Taking Bakhmut will allow the Russians to move onwards towards the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinivka line, and possibly even going around and taking Siversk from the west. This will allow them to capture this whole area and take control of it. This will leave Kreminnas and the Severodonetsk-Lysychansk area safe, and also allow them to reinstate offensives towards Liman to the north. And at the same time, it will also allow them to choose where to attack, whether it be Konstantinivka, Kramatorsk, or Slavyansk, and possibly even focus their forces to the south towards Toretsk or even Avdiivka to push the Ukrainians away from the Donetsk region. So currently, the main and most strategic point in the front line is Bakhmut, and the Russians are slowly but surely advancing towards it. The current situation is that there's a large concentration of forces by both sides by the city of Bakhmut, where they both are fighting to take control of it. The Ukrainians are holding on very tightly and preventing any Russian advance inside the city itself. However, the Russians have recently captured Opytne as well as Kurdyumivka, Usarianivka, and are now attacking Klishchivka. By attacking Klishchivka, they will be able to gain fire control over Ivanivska and this whole highway that is the main supply line to Bakhmut. Then there's also this line in the north, this highway here, which the Russians have to capture Pitorodne as well as Krasnohora before they're able to get fire control of this area. So that is the main focus of attacks for the Russian army, as they want to cut off the supply lines in a small scale, after which they will advance northwards. Now that is it for the Russian side. As for the Ukrainian side, their clear focus is on the Donetsk city itself. This is because we see that the Ukrainians are wanting to hold on to the southern part, which is this area between Marinka and Volodar. This is to cut off the supply line in the south by attacking the Olenivka area. So they want to concentrate their forces here in the south and advance eastwards towards Olenivka and cut off the supplies in the south. Then they also have the focus in the north, where they want to enter the ring road of the Donetsk city and attack to the north to cut off the supply lines coming from the north. They will not be able to completely cut off all the supplies other than attacking from the northeast to gain the advantage by attacking in a very large pincer maneuver around the huge city of Donetsk, which has a population of about 1 million people. With this, they will be able to cut off the supplies from the east as well. However, they will be able to cut off most of the Donetsk supplies by cutting off the northern and southern areas, and then they can use their HIMARS to attack the last supply line, which will be easier for them. This will allow them to cut off most supplies going in and out of Donetsk, and it will allow them to both slow down the Bakhmut offensive by focusing a lot of Russian troops and reinforcements here in the south around Donetsk, and will also allow them to gain a huge advantage in this war, as the Russians have struggled in capturing Pisky as well as are still struggling with Marinka and Avdiivka, which are these frontline cities, which are the main defensive lines of the Ukrainian armed forces. However, currently we're seeing them being on the defensive as Russians are pushing onwards. They have gained slow advances in Marinka, they have completely captured Pisky and are moving towards Pervomaiska and Vodian, and they are also attacking to the north of Avdiivka, trying to pincer it from the north and the south at the same time. This means that the Russians also have the advantage here. Generally speaking, the Donbass region, the Russians have the advantage. However, they are struggling a lot as the Ukrainians have prepared defenses here for a very long time since the war started in 2014, and they are still holding on to the front line, despite the Russian advantage in firepower. Anyways, this is it for the Donetsk front analysis. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.